Hello. We left the previous tutorial for 2DSmoke right where we had the smoke coming out of the fire pit, and it looked pretty good. Now what we wanted to do is be able to create sort of smoke trails, or the ability to create smoke that I can actually fly through, smoke that actually works in 3D space, that responds to cameras. So for that, I'm going to create a new composition. I will give this composition the name 3DSmoke. And it's the same settings as everything else we've worked with. 1280 by 720, 30 FPS drop frame, 10 seconds. Click OK on that. For this one, I am going to be using probably three filters. The first filter I'm going to use is going to create my particles. The second filter is going to use those particles to actually create the smoke. So the first thing I want to do is I want to create a solid, and I'm going to name this solid particles, since it will hold my particles. Make sure that it's comp size, click OK. And to this filter, to this solid, I'm going to apply the filter fractal noise. Now, fractal noise is a very, very useful filter. This is one that you want to spend some time exploring. It works wonders for creating smoke, for creating water, for creating textures. And if you recall correctly, when we were doing the first the Sedona exercise, the texture that I gave you guys, that was that quad texture that we use for showing and hiding the black and white Sedona, the sepia tone Sedona, that actually was moving in the movie that I gave you originally. I don't think anyone caught that. And that's because I had actually used this filter to create the texture that was the little blocks showing up and down. You notice that gives you black and white smoke by default, and if I scrub, nothing happens to it, but it's very easily changeable. You have things like evolution that allow you to rotate the amount of smoke that you have, or you could actually go inside the filter itself and start changing transformation values, such as rotating the whole smoke, or going subscale if you want to, by going under sub settings and rotating only parts of it. Let's see, changing, decreasing, or increasing the size of the things inside the actual smoke. So you could actually change the X and Y values of the different layers, let's call them that, of fractal noise. So let me go ahead and click reset at the top of the filter so that I reset all the values, and let's get started. So the first thing I want to do is I want to make sure that this smoke is moving through time for at least 5 seconds. That's about the length I'm going to give my particles to exist. So I'll create a keyframe at the beginning of that particles layer for evolution with a value of 0 degrees. And I'm going to go to 5 seconds, to the 5-second mark, and I am going to change that to, say, 1 rotation. 1 rotation is plenty. You'll see once I scrub how much it actually changes. It changes quite a bit with 1 rotation. It does come back to the original values, so this could become something that you loop fairly easy, and that's why I chose only one rotation, of the evolution. So what I'm going to do now is, with that setup, I am going to change this from basic to cloudy to give me a little bit more pop, and from soft linear to spline, so that I get this puffy looking smoky texture. I am going to pre-compose that particular layer, so I'm going to press Control Shift C or Apple Shift C on the Mac to create a particle pre-composition, and I'm just simply going to call it Particles Comp. I want to make sure that I move all my attributes into the new composition. I don't want to leave them outside. I want to move them in. So basically I'm creating a wrapper around that particular layer, as I've shown you in class. Now that will become my particle, or the particles for the smoke. Now I'm going to create a new solid, Control Y. And in this solid, this one I'm going to call smoke. I'm going to make sure that it is the same size, the same comp size, and everything remains the same. And then on top of this one, I am going to apply the filter that we used for fire, CC Particle Whirl. Now with CC Particle Whirl, what I want to do is, first thing, I want to turn off that grid. As you know by now, I don't like the grid. I don't like seeing the grid. It gets on the way. It's helpful if you have a proper 3D environment. Since we don't, then to me it's just not working for what I need to do. So I'll turn it off, and I am going to turn off the particle comp layer. And that is because from that particle, we've already set it up. We got it where we want it. We're only going to use the information inside that layer as the particle. The next thing I want to do is I want to go to the particle drop down. I am going to change my particle type from line to texture faded disk. And then I am going to change, notice that that activates the texture drop down. From that texture drop down, I'm going to choose texture layer, and then I'm going to go particles comp. Notice that it creates little puffs of something. These puffs of something are colorized based on my birth and death colors. So I'm going to change both of them to white so that they're visible. And I am now going to increase the birth size to about, I want to say 0.5, and the death size to about 1.5. So that means my smoke starts small and then it increases as it fades out. It's getting bigger and bigger. I'm going to maintain the size variation and max opacity as is for now. But you'll notice that with getting bigger particles, you start to notice that I am actually using the filter that I had applied to that sub layer inside particles comp, the fractal noise. That's actually what you're looking at. So if I scrub, I should see my fractal noise inside the particles. The next thing I want to do is I want to kill the gravity. So let me collapse particle and go into physics. I want to change the gravity. I want to make sure that the gravity is 0. I don't want the smoke, or I could make it go up if I wanted to. But for what we're going to do right now, I want to create a smoke trail, sort of like the thing that you see coming out of a rocket when it's shooting into space. And so what I want to do is I want to reduce the velocity of this as well, because smoke just doesn't shoot like that. If it shot like that, it would look like steam, like a steam gun, and that's not what we're going for. We're going again for a smoke trail. So I'll reduce that to about 0.3, 0.4. Let me start with 0.3 and see what that does. So 0.3 is fairly decent. It's not going way too far. And what I want to do as well is I want to increase the longevity to about 5 seconds. I want my particles to exist for about 5 seconds. Now notice that how big that gets. And so that means I need to come back and probably reduce my velocity to about 0.15. And I also want to increase my birth rate to about 10. That's going to populate the whole screen. Now this might slow down the machine quite a bit because you're getting quite a lot of particles. So now it's time to start playing around with size, longevity, and things like that to be able to, it is like I said in my previous tutorials, the tutorial from the fire, the amount of particles is what slows down your machine and what kills the calculations and might actually make the program halt and stall the machine completely because it's actually trying to calculate. Eventually it will get to a calculation, but it might take days in some instances depending on the kind of CPU you have. So I would be very careful with the amount of particles that we put on the screen. So I reduced that from 10 to 5. It's a little bit more manageable, and see if this will work. Let's take a look and see if this will work. Now that still looks like a cotton ball and it's really not doing much in terms of smoke, and there's two reasons for that. The first one is smoke really doesn't look that puffy. I mean, it doesn't have that much gray inside. So what we want to do is make it look a little whiter, a little bit more solid. And the second thing is I want to be able to move this smoke. So let's go back to the beginning, to the very beginning of the composition, and open up my producer. Now this producer is going to be shooting smoke from a point, so I'm not going to change the radius this time. But what I do want is I want to move my Y position down towards the bottom, and I want to move the X position to the left. And this is just in this case because I want the smoke to come from the lower left-hand side and sort of shoot into the horizon as it's being shot from a chemtrail, from a plane, or from a missile or something like that. So let's go ahead and create a position Z keyframe at the beginning, and then I'm gonna go all the way to about 5 seconds, and I'm gonna shoot that position Z into space. Quite a lot. Remember, these position X and radius X refer to size of the screen. So a value of 1 for position Z means a value of 1 based on the height or width of the actual screen. Same thing for X and same thing for Y. So in our case, our screen is 1280 by 720. Position Z means we shot about 33 times 1280. And that's how far the original position of the smoke creator is going. You can see it going, the little red ball, the red gizmo is going into space and leaving a smoke trail behind. Now, once again, what I want to do is probably go back into the smoke and finesse that a little bit. So let me double click my particles comp to finesse this smoke, the fractal noise. What I want to do is probably increase my brightness. Let me go 5 this time. Let me go a little higher. Let me go probably 15. That's bright. Let me go back to the 3DSmoke composition and see what that did. See if that helped that in any way. Still not bright enough. I see a lot of gray little things. So we might want to reduce the contrast. Not the contrast, I'm sorry. We might want to increase the white value and see if that works. That's a little bit better, but now it's too white. Now it's too puffy. So it's somewhere in between. Let me go ahead and use 20. And you can also work with, you can also work with changing the type of smoke that you're producing, whether you want soft linear or if you want block, just to see the different results. You can also change from cloudy to basic. Maybe that gives you a better solution. It all depends on what you're going for. So basically play around with those settings until you find something that fits your particular needs. Let's go ahead and take a look at what this looks like on the 3DSmoke, and that's starting to look fairly nice. However, my puffs of smoke are a little bit separated. I want to keep them together a little more, and that is affected by the speed at which they're shooting from the gun that is creating them. So let me select the smoke layer, and that happens to be the velocity at which they are being created. Let me go to 0.1 and see what that does. They're sticking together a little bit more, and that's good. And then they spread out through time as they fade out. Okay. Now the beauty of this particular thing, let me actually increase my particle rate to about 10 and see what that does. It's going to give me more particles, but it's going to slow me down slightly. But for the intent, for what I'm trying to do for this tutorial, is going to work beautifully. So now the beautiful thing about this now is, as you see, these are being shot into 3D space. But if you look at this from our perspective, it looks like a 2D gun that is getting smaller and moving towards the right-hand side and up on the composition. The beautiful thing would be if we could move through that smoke and actually follow that gun. Say if we were doing creating a video where we're actually chasing a rocket. For something like that, we obviously need a camera. So I'm going to create a camera, Control-Shift-C, or Layer New Camera. Let's see if I ever get to a Control-Shift-Alt-C, or you create a new camera. I'm going to keep the 50mm camera, but that comes by default in my case. If yours is a different number, that's fine. You could use 35. 35 or 50 are the most commonly used cameras, so you could use either or. Let me go for 35 this time, just so that I can get a little bit of a wider angle. And I'm going to place my time marker around 3 seconds. Now, in my camera, having selected the layer for the camera, I'm going to press P for the position of the camera, and I am going to shoot into the Z-axis, and you'll notice that I am actually following the trail of smoke, as if I were chasing an actual rocket. So with that said, I am going to create an original position, Z position, for my camera at the very beginning of my layer position. Let me change that to create a keyframe for that position, and then I am going to follow this for about 4 seconds, and I'm going to move just on the Z-axis so that I am moving parallel to the smoke and see what effect that gives us. Now, I can actually create another keyframe somewhere in the middle and move on the x-axis so that I move towards and actually even across the smoke. If you wanted to get that detail, if you wanted to go into the other side, and this gives you that view as if you were actually chasing the smoke in 3D space. Now let me do a quick render of this. Press the 0 key on my keypad, my numeric pad, and see what that gives us. Now you could get more detail on the amount of smoke particles that you want to create, depending on the RAM power that you have and what the requirements of your composition are. Now this, in this case, really doesn't do much visually for what we're aiming for. It still looks like it's a gun that is shooting smoke, but once you see it in motion, it's quite different. Let me actually put this on top of an image. I'm going to import an image. Let's say I'll import Chicago skyline. Let's see what that does. And I'm going to put that behind this smoke particle setup, and I am going to make that a 3D layer. Now this 3D layer, I am going to change its position to about, I want to say 50,000 on the z-axis, and then I'm going to increase its size to cover the whole screen. Let me go back to the beginning so that I can increase the size to fit the whole screen. Let me do a render of this guy and see. Now having something as a reference, a 3D environment, so to speak, makes quite a difference on the way the particles look. Let me keep on rendering those for a couple of seconds, and as you've seen, the producer is something that we can keyframe, so we could create any kind of path for this smoke and have it move into a true 3D space if we want to, have it curve if we want to, because these are motion paths. They are created like any other keyframe when we're creating position changes. And so it gives you that ability to actually manipulate the smoke trail whichever way you want to, in whichever direction you want to move it. Now with a 3D environment, it makes quite a difference as to how the thing looks. So if it's a special effect that you're going for, say a meteorite falling, and you want to do some sort of trail behind it, or an airplane shooting another airplane down, or in a war scene or something like that, you have the ability to actually create those smoke trails. My puffs of smoke are still a little bit loose. They're still a little bit separated, so I would have to go in and play with the size just a tad to get a better, more consistent puff of smoke or trail of smoke, and that's fairly easy. Once you go back into the layer, you can go ahead and change the actual particle sizes. You can start playing with that. Make sure that perhaps I want my puffs to be a little bit bigger when they start and a little bit bigger when they die. If I wanted to go with something like that, that gives you more robust amount of smoke. Maybe I want to make sure that it's not as granular, that my smoke is not as granular, so go back to the particles composition and make it a little bit brighter, or increase the contrast, reduce the brightness, decrease contrast if you want to. See what that gives you. So you have different options. Basically, it's a controllable filter that allows you to produce things the way exactly you want them, and not just simply by putting stock footage on top of something and trying to green screen it. So hopefully these two smoke filter approaches work for your projects. I'll see you guys in class.